On the screen now, you're going to find a list of the motorbikes that are currently covered by this recall. Now, on the 17th of January this year, 2023, BMW started the process with what is called a stop sale or stop delivery notification that went out to all their BMW dealers globally. And it affects 3 bikes. So that's the GS, the GSA, and the RT. Now what the stop notification is really all about is to ensure that the dealers from that point onwards, from the 17th, didn't deliver any bikes to customers without this recall being carried out. So then on the 18th came the actual recall notification informing the dealers of what they had to do in terms of the software update, and I'll explain how a software update is connected to a gearbox, but it's a potential gearbox problem. So BMW do a lot of intense testing on our bikes before they get released and we buy them. So you can be pretty well assured that they've done hundreds and thousands of miles testing these bikes before they're released for sale. But sometimes there are some very strange scenarios whereby faults can occur. So during the last few years, as far as I'm aware, it's only a handful or less than a handful of customers that have had a gearbox input shaft failure on a GS or a GSA. So what's also very interesting in this is that BMW did an awful lot of research to try and find the problem. And it's actually quite interesting. It took me a bit of time to find the information, but I thought I'd share it with you because it is quite interesting. So the first reported fault was in October of 2020. That came from a customer in Italy. There were a further 2 more customers, another one in Italy, another one in the Netherlands, in October and November of 2020, and then the parts were sent to BMW's analysis lab for testing. So they did material testing, X-ray scanning, electron microscope testing, surface treatment examinations, on and on and on. And then further on in the testing process, they went to a laboratory where they had force torque application testing and load change pulsation testing. So if you're an engineer and you know anything about that sort of thing, that's taking an input shaft and subjecting that to huge forces, really, really fast turning, twisting forces, the sort of forces that we will never generally encounter or have any problems with our GSs on the road. They then subjected a GS and a GSA to misuse off-road. So they probably thrashed the hell out of it and did a lot of things that you really shouldn't do off-road. But the combination of all these tests is they finally found the problem, and we now have a software solution to take care when our bikes are off the road, getting some air, and that throttles on. Now you might be thinking, well, it can't apply to me because you've not received notification from BMW telling you that you need to return your bike. But that actual recall notification process, in which we receive to our homes a letter advising us that we need to return our bikes, that process will start somewhere in March. It might start a little bit earlier, but I think the 10th of March is the date from which we'll start to receive letters asking us to return our motorbikes. So we don't need to be concerned, we don't need to worry. Your bike is highly unlikely to give you any problems. And what it turns out to be is, I'll try and explain this in simple terms. So for road riding, it's highly unlikely this problem's going to happen. But if you take your bike off-road, in particular, you get some air underneath your wheels and you're jumping, there is a scenario under which, for example, the bike's off the ground, you are traveling at, say, as an example, 25 or 30 kilometers an hour, but you're on the throttle, you've got some throttle applied, and within that couple of seconds or even half a second as the bike takes air, that rear wheel can spin up very quickly and very fast indeed. So when the bike lands back on the ground, you have a disparity in speed. So the bike may actually be only traveling at 25 or 30 kilometers an hour, but that back wheel, because maybe it's an inexperienced rider, they've still got lots of throttle on, that rear wheel can be spinning up to 60, 70 kilometers an hour in just a small amount of time. And when the bike lands back on the ground, there is a lot of forces being put through the gearbox and the drive shaft assembly, which wouldn't normally be there under normal road riding. So that puts an awful lot of force, rotational force, through the gearbox, and under certain scenarios, certain conditions, the input shaft from the engine to the gearbox has failed. But when you think about the total sales of the GS, the GSA and the RT, which I don't have the official figures, but it's got to be in the hundreds of thousands of units since 2018, to only have a handful of bikes that have failed is actually pretty good, and there's no real big reason for us to be concerned. I'd also like to say thank you to Andre, one of the channel subscribers who brought this to my attention so that I could do a bit of research and bring you some information. So what do you need to do? Nothing is the answer. You just need to wait till you get the letter from BMW advising you to return your bike for the recall. Now the recall is a software update. They're not going to replace any hardware. And let me explain why they're going to do a software update. So they did all this material science testing to find out whether there was a fault or a faulty product within the gearbox, and they established that there wasn't. But the change from the early 1200 to the 1250 is the introduction of the TFT dashboard and the Ride Mode Pro, in particular the Enduro Pro mode. Now, for those of you that do spend time off-road and you do use the Enduro Pro, and actually, if you want to understand some more, go back and watch my previous mini-series all about dynamic ESA. It's a 3-part series, and in the middle of that series, I explain about Enduro and Enduro Pro and what the differences are between the normal ride modes. How can a software update fix the problem? So what they're going to do with the Enduro Pro mode, they're going to make some changes within the settings, because bear in mind, if you go back and watch the series all about dynamic ESA, where I explain in detail things like the IMU and the sensor systems that are on our bikes, BMW can detect in a fraction of a second when the bike leaves the ground, because there are, for example, height sensors front and rear on the suspension. So as that suspension decompresses, the bike lifts off the ground, they're able to detect the bike's left the ground and got some air. So they're going to make or they have made changes to stop that rear wheel spinning up so much when the bike's up in the air. So I think BMW should be applauded or congratulated for doing this. It took them a long time to try and find out under which scenarios, under which cases this fault can occur, and now we're going to have an update that's going to correct it. Now, if you think back to, I won't name the manufacturer, but a certain red bike that I owned, and I had a gearbox problem with that, I found out that the manufacturer knew about the problem and they continued to use the same part for many, many years. And there was no warranty, there was no recall, nothing was done, even though it's a known problem with all the dealers, and a lot of owners, including myself, experienced it. So for BMW to come up front and say, we've identified the problem, we've got a fix, we're going to recall all of the bikes, pretty impressive. Anyway, I hope that's some information for you. If you're at all concerned, just go to your internet browser and type in BMW Motorrad recall check. It'll come up, it'll take you to different sites depending on where you are in the world. It affects all the bikes globally. So those of you in Australia, Canada, US, Great Britain, we're all going to have to return our bikes to have this software update. But one benefit is, because it's a recall, we're all going to get a software update for free. So for those of you that have already had this done in the past, the dashboard operates much quicker. And when you have a software update, it updates and refines lots of systems on the bike, which is all good news. Anyway, I'll see you soon. Thank you for your time.